Chapter 10, Measuring a Nation's Income. This lecture is on measuring a country's income with a focus on gross domestic product, GDP. Our goal is to understand GDP and its significance in evaluating economic performance. GDP is a key economic indicator representing the total income earned by everyone in the economy and the total expenditure on the economy's output of goods and services. It's crucial to note that in any economy, total income must equal total expenditure. This balance occurs because every dollar spent by a buyer translates into a dollar income for the seller. We also revisit the circular flow model from Chapter 2. This model illustrates the interactions between households and firms within a closed economy. Households are buyers in the goods and services market and sellers in the factors of production market. Conversely, firms act as sellers in the goods and services market and buyers in the factors of production market. As we expand our scope to include the government and the foreign sector, we move to an open economy perspective. This broader view encompasses households, firms, government, and foreign entities interacting within the market. Understanding GDP. Gross domestic product, GDP, is defined as the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country over a specific period. To avoid double counting, it is important to differentiate between final goods, which are sold directly to consumers, and intermediate goods, which are used to produce final goods. For example, eggs sold directly to households are final goods, whereas eggs sold to a baker for cake production are considered intermediate goods. GDP focuses solely on domestic production, and it is typically reported quarterly and annually. Developed economies usually provide these reports quarterly, while developing and underdeveloped economies often report annually. Gross National Product, GNP, differs from GDP by including income earned by nationals abroad and excluding income earned by foreigners within the country. For example, income earned by American citizens working overseas is included in US GNP, but not in US GDP, whereas income earned by foreigners working in the US is included in US GDP. Now we will explore how to measure GDP using the expenditure method. The expenditure method is a common approach to calculating GDP, and it is based on the idea that GDP is the total expenditure on an economy's output of goods and services. Look at GDP equation. The GDP equation is given by y equals to c plus I plus g plus nx, where y represents GDP, c is the total consumption spending, I is the total investment spending, g is the total government spending, and x is net exports, that is exports minus imports. The components C, I, G, and NX are the primary elements that make up GDP. For further exploration of US GDP and economic indicators, you may find the following resources useful. For US GDP data, to access the trajectory of US GDP reported by the Fed data source, you can view this data by visiting the Fed US GDP website, given here. For US debt clock, to view a range of economic indicators related to the US state and federal budgets, visit the US debt clock website, given here. Let's now examine a table that includes the dollar values of GDP and its components, GDP per person or GDP per capita, and their respective percentages. By summing up the values of C, I, G, and NX, you get the total value of GDP. For example, in the United States, consumption spending accounts for 68% of GDP, which is the highest proportion. Investment spending, government spending, and net exports also contribute to the overall GDP. It is important to note that the proportion of each component can vary significantly between different economies. For instance, in China, investment spending takes the highest proportion of GDP, accounting for 45%. This variation highlights how different economies allocate their spend differently based on their economic priorities and development stages. In analyzing historical GDP data, we observe cycles of expansion and recession of US GDP trajectory. Notable examples include the Great Recession, happened in 2008 to 2009. COVID-19 happened in 2019 to 2021. These cycles consist of peaks, recessions, troughs, and recoveries, collectively known as the business cycle. Here, let's break down the components of GDP. Consumption spending, denoted as C. This includes all households' expenditures on goods and services. These expenditures are categorized into durables, such as automobiles and appliances, non-durables, such as food and clothing, and services, such as medical care and education. Note that purchases of new housing are not included in consumption spending. Investment spending, denoted as I. This refers to spending on capital goods that will be used to produce other goods and services in the future. This includes business capital, such as factory buildings and equipment, residential capital, such as apartment buildings and personal residences, and inventory accumulation, such as stockpile goods. Now let's discuss government purchases and net exports. Government purchases, denoted as G, this encompasses all spending on goods and services by local, state, and federal governments. It includes salary for public sector employees and other purchases, but excludes transfer payments, such as Social Security benefits, as these do not involve the productions of goods and services. Then, net exports, denoted as NX. Net exports are calculated as the difference between exports and imports. Exports represent spending on domestically produced goods by foreigners, while imports are spending on foreign goods by domestic residents. Let's test our understanding of GDP components with the following exercise. We'll categorize various types of spending and activities into their respective GDP components. Household purchases of durable goods fall under the consumption component. Household purchases of non-durable goods also fall under the consumption component. Household purchases of services are part of the consumption component. Household purchases of new housing are categorized as investment component. Purchases of capital equipment are included in the investment component. Inventory changes are considered part of the investment component. Purchases of new structures are also part of the investment component. Depreciation is not included in any GDP component. Salaries of government workers fall under the government purchases component. Government expenditures on public works are part of the government purchases component. Transfer payments are not included in any GDP component. Foreign purchases of domestically produced goods are categorized as net exports, specifically as exports. Domestic purchases of foreign goods are also categorized under net exports, specifically as imports. By categorizing these activities, you can see how different types of expenditures contribute to the calculation of GDP. Remember, understanding these components helps in grasping how the overall economy performs and how different sectors interact within it. Let's test our understanding with a few quiz questions. Question number 1. Sam bakes a cake and sells it to Carla for $10. Woody pays Diane $30 to tutor him. In this economy, GDP is... Here, you can just add up the payments that Sam and Diane have earned out of their services as baking a cake and tutoring at the amount of $10 and $30 respectively, which equals to $40. So the answer is D. Question number 2. After graduation, an American college student moves to Japan to teach English. Her salary is included in. Since this American student earns her salary in Japan, it's either that her salary is included in Japan's GDP or US's GNP. So the answer is B, only in Japan's GDP. Question number 3. Which of the following does not add to US GDP? A. Boeing manufactures and sells a plane to Air France. Since Boeing is a US company, this production sits in the US land, so it is US GDP. B. General Motors builds a new auto factory in North Carolina. General Motors, or GM, is a US company, so again, their production that sits in the US land, it is US GDP. C. The city of New York pays a salary to a policeman. This is a service conducted in the US city of New York, so it is US GDP. D. The federal government sends a social security check to your grandmother. This payment is a transfer payment, and it cannot be included in the GDP because it is not a product of goods and services produced in the economy. So the answer is D. Let's delve into how GDP is calculated. Nominal GDP, this is valued at current prices and is not adjusted for inflation. Real GDP, this is valued at constant prices and is adjusted for inflation using a base year's prices. GDP per capita, when we take GDP and divide it by the population, we obtain the GDP per capita, also known as GDP per person. This matrix provides an average economic output per individual and is a useful indicator for comparing the economic performance of different countries or regions on a per person basis. It helps to understand the standard of living and economic well-being of the population. GDP deflator is a measure of price inflation and is calculated as the ratio of nominal GDP to real GDP multiplied by 100. Essentially, you take the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP and then multiply the result by 100 to obtain the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is one of several price index indicators used to gauge inflation and price level changes in the economy. Other common price index indicators include the Consumer Price Index, CPI, which measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. And the Producer Price Index, PPI, which measures the average change over time in the selling prices received by domestic producers for their output and is a preferred measure at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. Additionally, the Personal Consumption Expenditure PCE index, which measures the prices paid by consumers for goods and services, and it is preferred by the Federal Reserve for its inflation target. Understanding inflation. Inflation is an important aspect to consider when analyzing GDP. Inflation rate. This is calculated as the percentage change in the price level from one period to the next. Use the formula GDP deflator in year 2 minus GDP deflator in year 1 divided by GDP deflator in year 1, then multiply by 100. Types of inflation. Inflation, it is a general increase in price levels. Deflation, it is a decrease in price levels. Disinflation, it is a slowdown in the rate of inflation. And hyperinflation, it is extremely high and typically accelerating inflation, often exceeding 100%. Recession. Having learned about GDP, we can now define when an economy is in recession. A recession is typically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP. During a recession, several economic indicators reflect this downturn. Real GDP decreases, income levels drop, unemployment rates rise, profits decline, and bankruptcies become more frequent. These factors combined indicate a significant slowdown in economic activity. Let's take on this exercise. Given 3 years of data for the prices and quantities of pizzas and chocolate, with 2021 designated as the base year, we will calculate the nominal GDP, real GDP, and GDP deflator. Step 1. Calculating nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is calculated using the current prices for each respective year. For year 2021, price of a pizza $15, quantity of pizzas 300, price of a chocolate $2.50, quantity of chocolates 1,000, nominal GDP, you take $15 times 300 plus $2.50 times 1,000, that equals to $7,000. For year 2022, price of a pizza $60, quantity of pizzas 400, price of a chocolate $3, quantity of chocolates 1,200, nominal GDP, so you take $16 times 400 plus $3 times 1,200, that equals to $10,000. For year 2023, price of a pizza $17, quantity of pizzas 500, price of a chocolate $3.50, quantity of chocolates 1,300, nominal GDP, so you take $17 times 500 plus $3.50 times 1,300, that equals to $13,050. So the nominal GDP for 2021, 2022, and 2023 are $7,000, $10,000, and $13,050 respectively. Step 2. Calculating real GDP. Real GDP is calculated using the prices from the base year, 2021. For year 2021, price of a pizza, $15. Quantity of pizzas, 300. Price of a chocolate, $2.50. Quantity of chocolates, 1,000. Nominal GDP, so you take $15 times 300 plus $2.50 times 1,000. That equals to $7,000. Note that for 2021, real GDP equals nominal GDP because we use the base year prices. For year 2022, quantity of pizzas 400, quantity of chocolates 1,200. Real GDP, so you take $15 times 400 plus $2.50 times 1,200. That equals to $9,000. For year 2023, quantity of pizzas 500, quantity of chocolates 1,300. Real GDP, so you take $15 times 500 plus $2.50 times 1,300. That equals to $10,750. So real GDP for 2021, 2022, and 2023 are $7,000, $9,000, and $10,750, respectively. Step 3. Calculating GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is calculated by dividing nominal GDP by real GDP and then multiplying by 100. For year 2021, nominal GDP is $7,000, real GDP is $7,000. GDP deflator, so you take $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100. That equals to 100. Note that the GDP deflator for the base year is always 100. For year 2022, nominal GDP is $10,000. Real GDP is $9,000. GDP deflator, so you take $10,000 divided by $9,000 times 100. That equals to 111.11. For year 2023, nominal GDP is $13,050. Real GDP is $10,750. GDP deflator, so you take $13,050 divided by $10,750 times 100. That equals to 121.40. So the GDP deflator for 2021, 2022, and 2023 are 100, 111.11, and 121.40, respectively. If we extend our calculation to find the growth rate of nominal GDP, we can do as follows. For year 2021, nominal GDP is $7,000. So the growth rate of nominal GDP, you take $7,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%. That equals to 0%. Note that the growth rate of nominal GDP for the base year is always 0%. For year 2022, nominal GDP of 2022 is $10,000. Nominal GDP of 2021 is $7,000. The growth rate of nominal GDP of 2022, so you take $10,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%, that equals to 42.90%. For year 2023, nominal GDP of 2023 is $13,050. Nominal GDP of 2022 is $10,000. The growth rate of nominal GDP of 2023, so you take $13,050 minus $10,000 divided by $10,000 times 100%, that equals to 30.50%. If we extend our calculation to find the growth rate of nominal GDP, we can do as follows. For year 2021, nominal GDP is $7,000. So the growth rate of nominal GDP, you take $7,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%. That equals to 0%. Note that the growth rate of nominal GDP for the base year is always 0%. For year 2022, nominal GDP of 2022 is $10,000. Nominal GDP of 2021 is $7,000. The growth rate of nominal GDP of 2022, so you take $10,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%, that equals to 42.90%. For year 2023, nominal GDP of 2023 is $13,050. Nominal GDP of 2022 is $10,000. The growth rate of nominal GDP of 2023, so you take $13,050 minus $10,000 divided by $10,000 times 100%, that equals to 30.50%. If we do the same step to find the growth rate of real GDP, we can do as follows. For year 2021, real GDP of 2021 is $7,000. Growth rate of real GDP 2021, so you take $7,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%, that equals to 0%. Note that the growth rate of real GDP as well as the growth rate of nominal GDP for the base year is always 0%. For year 2022, the real GDP of 2022 is $9,000. Real GDP of 2021 is $7,000. Growth rate of real GDP of 2022, so you take $9,000 minus $7,000 divided by $7,000 times 100%, that equals to 28.60%. For year 2023, the real GDP of 2023 is $10,750. Real GDP of 2022 is $9,000. Growth rate of real GDP of 2023, so you take $10,750 minus $9,000 divided by $9,000 times 100%. That equals to 19.40%. Let's wrap up with a few more quiz questions. Question number 4. An economy produces 10 cookies in year 1 at a price of $2 per cookie and 12 cookies in year 2 at a price of $3 per cookie. From year 1 to year 2, real GDP increases by. To calculate real GDP, we use the price of the base year. Assume year 1 is the base year. Real GDP for year 1, you take $2 times 10 equals to $20. Real GDP for year 2, you take $2 times 12, that equals to $24. To find the growth rate of real GDP, you take real GDP of year 2 minus real GDP of year 1 divided by real GDP of year 1 times 100%. So you take $24 minus $20 divided by $20 times 100%, that equals to 20%. So the answer is A, 20%. Question number 5. If Mr. Keating quits his job as a teacher to homeschool his own children, what happens to GDP? In this case, Mr. Keating's income is eliminated when he quits his job. Since there is no income generating to GDP, GDP will fall. So the answer is C. GDP falls because his market income decreases. Question number 6. Angus, the sheep farmer, sells wool to Barnaby, the knitter, for $20. Barnaby makes 2 sweaters, each of which has a market price of $40. Khalid buys one of them, while the other remains on the shelf of Barnaby's store to be sold later. What is GDP here? Remember, GDP only takes the market value of final goods produced. Here, we need to consider the market price of the sweaters, and that is $40 times 2 equals to $80. This is the total number of sweaters Barnaby can produce. We do not consider the $20 that Barnaby paid for the wool, as it is used to make the sweaters. So the answer is C. $80. After an in-depth analysis of GDP, the question arises, can GDP be considered a comprehensive measure of economic well-being? It is widely accepted among economists and professionals that GDP is a primary indicator of economic well-being. This is primarily because economies with higher GDP levels tend to exhibit better living standards, including improved healthcare and educational systems. For example, countries such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and members of the European Union, which have higher GDP per capita, generally display higher life expectancy, greater literacy rates, and more extensive internet access. Conversely, nations with lower GDP per capita often experience lower life expectancy, reduced literacy rates, and limited internet availability. Nevertheless, despite the advantages of GDP as an economic measure, it is not without its limitations. GDP does not account for several critical aspects of well-being, such as leisure time, the value of non-market activities, environmental quality, and income distribution. To gain a more comprehensive understanding of societal well-being, we can consider the Human Development Index, HDI, which is a more holistic measure developed by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. The HDI provides a broader perspective on human development and well-being. For further insight into the HDI, please refer to the provided link. Take a look at this table and let's compare three major economies, the United States, Germany, and China. We look at their respective real GDP per capita or per person, life expectancy, average years of schooling, and overall life or HDI. The values highlight the relative economic and social conditions in these countries. Real GDP. The United States leads with the highest real GDP, indicating the largest economy among the three. Germany follows with a substantial GDP per capita, reflecting its large and rapidly growing economy. China has the smallest real GDP per capita of the three, but remains one of the largest economies in Asia. Life expectancy. Germany has the highest life expectancy, indicating a higher standard of health and well-being. The United States has a slightly lower life expectancy, while China has the lowest of the three, though it has been improving steadily. Average years of schooling. The United States and Germany have similar averages, reflecting their advanced educational systems. China has a significantly lower average, highlighting the ongoing development in its educational infrastructure. Human Development Index, HDI. Germany has the highest HDI, indicating the best overall human development among the three. The United States also has a high HDI, though slightly lower than Germany. China's HDI is notably lower, reflecting the challenges it faces in human development, despite its rapid economic growth. This comparison illustrates the economic strengths and social development levels of these major economies, highlighting the relative achievements and ongoing challenges in each country. That concludes our lecture on GDP and its components.